Hey, it's Wes Stearns. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. Actually, it's the most challenging part of being a real estate agent. Low appraisal. So imagine you've got a buyer and a seller that have agreed to a price and terms on a contract, that home inspections occurred, and then the next week you find out you've got an appraisal issue. So what happens and what do you do? First of all, the buyer and the buyer agent is going to send a notice with a copy of the appraisal to the other agent. The other agent is going to be afforded an opportunity to look at the appraisal, look for some deficiencies or errors, and then hopefully ask the appraiser to reconsider the value based on other comparables that he or she may not have used. And by comparables, I mean other homes that have recently sold in the neighborhood. If there aren't any in the other neighborhood, some of the guidelines allow them to go out a mile or 2 miles out. And it's got to be within the same time frame, usually within the last 200 days. You just can't go back 4 years. So the first thing that can happen, the seller, upon having the appraisal reviewed and not adjusted by the appraiser, they can drop the price to the sales price. It could be $5,000, $10,000, just whatever the appraisal value is. If both parties agree to proceed, the seller drops the price, sales price down to the appraisal, and you go forward. The second option is to make adjustments on some of the concessions. So let's say that you had a $300,000 deal, and the seller in the contract was giving the buyer $10,000 towards the buyer's closing costs. And let's say the appraisal came in at $295,000. The seller can elect to drop the price down to $295,000, but maybe they can ask the buyer to forego the $10,000 and instead of get $10,000, get $5,000. So the net still stays the same to the seller, which would go from $300,000 less $10,000 down to $295,000 less $5,000. So the net is still $290,000. You can also, if the buyer says, hey, I still need the $10,000 towards closing, maybe the home inspection items that the seller agreed to fix, maybe you forego those. Maybe the buyer says, you know what, if you do drop the price down $5,000 lower because the appraisal is $5,000 lower, then you don't have to do any of the repairs that you agreed to in the home inspection. The buyer does not have to do that. The buyer does not have to forego the closing cost. And the seller does not have to sell at the sales price. So again, option one, drop the price down to the appraised value. Option two, come up with some other concessions, either lower the closing cost to help forego some home inspection items. Or you can meet between. Maybe the buyer says, hey, I can't go with $5,000 in closing. I need $8,000 in closing. And so you try to meet between. Fourth option, not a good option for anyone. No one wins in this situation. The deal falls apart. The buyer is going to get their earnest money deposit. So I'm saying the seller says, hey, I'm not selling lower. The buyer says, well, I don't have the money to make up the difference between the appraisal and the sales price. So the buyer would do a release of the contract. The buyer gets their deposit back, but the buyer would not get the money they spent on the home inspection and the appraisal at their discretion. For the seller, and they don't get the house. For the seller, they go back on the market. They can't go after the buyer's deposit. The house gets astigmatism. The longer it stays on the market, more people are going to wonder why it's been on the market so long, what's wrong with it, and then you're going to lose time. You may lose the prime time to sell the house. So no one wins in that situation, and of course the realtors have to start over again for both the buyer and the seller. A couple points with the appraisal. If it's a conventional appraisal, upon challenging the appraisal, you can order another appraisal if both parties are agreeable. The buyer is going to have to pay for another appraisal. If it's a VA or FHA appraisal, that VA appraisal, if the deal falls apart, that VA appraisal stays with the property for several months, meaning the seller is going to have to find another buyer that's not a VA buyer. The same situation with FHA. The FHA appraisal is going to stick with the property. If you'd like some comments or questions, please make those comments here or subscribe. Thank you.